What happens if I touch you? Asked the lowly cowboy. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. In the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the American West, there lived a cowboy named Jack. He wasn't the strongest, nor the most well-known, but his quiet, humble nature made him a man of respect in his small corner of the frontier. Jack had spent most of his life alone, working his ranch and avoiding the crowds of the nearby towns. He had been raised with little and had learned the hard way that in the West, you depended on no one but yourself. His ranch was small, just enough for him to survive, but Jack was content. He had no family left, no lover, just the land, his cattle, and the peace that came with isolation. It wasn't much, but it was enough. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Jack noticed something strange. A figure appeared in the distance, walking slowly toward his cabin. At first, he thought it might be one of the local settlers or perhaps a drifter passing through, but as the figure drew closer, he realized it was a woman. She moved gracefully, despite the dust and wear of the road. Her clothes were simple, but they seemed to have an elegance to them, as if she were a part of the land itself. Jack watched her approach, his curiosity piqued. She stopped just short of his porch, her eyes locking with his in a gaze that sent a chill down his spine. The wind rustled the trees, but for a moment, everything seemed still. She was a stranger, and yet, there was something familiar about her. She seemed different. "Can I help you?" Jack asked, his voice low, yet steady. The woman smiled faintly, a mysterious glint in her eyes. "I'm not sure," she replied, her voice soft but clear. "I was told I'd find someone here, someone who would understand." Jack raised an eyebrow, his interest growing. "Understand what?" She hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her words carefully. "What happens if I touch you?" she asked, her question hanging in the air like a challenge. Jack's heart skipped a beat. The question was unexpected, and yet, there was something about the way she asked it that made him feel uneasy. She wasn't just asking out of curiosity. There was something deeper in her tone, a sense of urgency he couldn't quite place. "I don't know what you mean," he said cautiously, taking a step back. "I'm just a simple cowboy. Nothing special about me." The woman stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. "But that's the thing, isn't it?" she said, almost to herself. "You think you're just a simple cowboy. But you're more than that. You've always been more than that." Jack's pulse quickened as her words struck a chord deep within him. He had always thought of himself as nothing more than a man of the land, someone whose life would never amount to anything more than the cattle he raised and the dust he kicked up with his boots. But this woman, this stranger, made him question everything. Before he could respond, she reached out, her hand hovering in the air between them. The air seemed to hum with anticipation, as if the very earth itself was holding its breath. Jack didn't move, frozen in place by the intensity of her gaze. What happened if she touched him? What could she possibly mean by such a strange question? His mind raced, but his body remained still. The woman's hand lingered just inches from his chest, and for a moment, Jack thought he might fall into some kind of trance. This was no ordinary encounter. This was the beginning of something that would change his life forever. The woman's hand hovered just above Jack's chest for what felt like an eternity. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension, and Jack's heart raced in his chest, louder than the wind rustling through the trees. He stood frozen, his instincts telling him to step back, but something about her presence, something in her eyes, kept him rooted to the spot. He wasn't sure what he expected, but he didn't expect what came next. Slowly, deliberately, the woman's fingers brushed against his shirt, her touch light, almost gentle. For a moment, the world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of his breath and the steady beat of his heart. Jack's body tensed, and yet, there was an inexplicable calm that settled over him. Her touch wasn't what he had feared. It was like an electric spark that jolted him to life, waking something deep inside of him that he had long since buried. The woman stepped back, her eyes never leaving his. "Do you feel it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack's mind raced, but he could only nod. He didn't know what was happening, but something had shifted between them, something powerful and undeniable. She gave him a small, knowing smile. You've always been more than what you let yourself believe, she said softly. There's a strength inside of you, one that you've kept hidden, even from yourself. Jack opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. What was she talking about? He was just a cowboy, nothing more. Just a man with a ranch, alone in the world. I don't understand, he finally said, his voice rough. I'm just a simple cowboy, nothing more. The woman's gaze softened, her smile gentle. That's where you're wrong, Jack. You're more than that. You always have been. She took another step back, her eyes scanning him, as if seeing him for who he truly was. Jack's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and curiosity. But why me? He asked, his voice trembling. Why now? The woman paused, her expression shifting from soft understanding to something darker, something more serious. Because the time has come, Jack. The time has come for you to face what you've been running from, what you've been denying for so long. Jack's brow furrowed in confusion. What are you talking about? I haven't been running from anything. The woman gave a small, sad smile. You've been running from your own destiny, from the truth of who you are, from what you're capable of. She stepped closer again, her voice dropping to a near whisper. The world is changing, Jack, and you are part of that change. You have a role to play, a purpose you've yet to realize. But you're not alone in this. Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. The woman's words felt like a prophecy, as though they were spoken with a weight that carried more meaning than he could comprehend. He wanted to push her away, to deny what she was saying, but something in him couldn't. He was drawn to her words, to the promise of something bigger than himself. What is it that you want from me? Jack finally asked, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. The woman's gaze locked with his, and for a moment, he could see the depth of something ancient and powerful in her eyes. I need your help, she said, her voice steady and calm. There is a great danger coming, one that will affect all of us. You can't fight it alone, Jack. But together, we might stand a chance. Jack felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. A danger? What could she possibly mean? He had lived a simple life, isolated from the chaos of the world. But the look in her eyes, the certainty, the urgency, made him question everything he had ever known. What kind of danger? Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. The woman hesitated for a moment, her eyes flickering toward the horizon. There are forces at play, forces that want to see us all torn apart. But we have a chance to fight back, to protect what we hold dear. But we can't do it without you, Jack. You're the key. Jack stood still, his heart racing. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, and for the first time in his life, he felt a spark of something greater than himself. He wasn't sure what it all meant, but one thing was clear. His life was about to change forever. Jack stood in stunned silence as the woman's words echoed in his mind. He was the key. The key to what, exactly? He had spent his life in isolation, far from the troubles of the world. He never asked for anything beyond a quiet existence. Now, this woman, a stranger, was asking him to take part in something much bigger, something that might change the course of his life, and his world, forever. The air around them seemed charged, as if the wind itself was holding its breath, waiting for his response. He shifted uncomfortably, feeling the weight of her gaze upon him. He wanted to dismiss her words, to walk away from this whole strange encounter. But there was a part of him that couldn't. Something deep inside him stirred. He couldn't ignore the pull, the sense that this was important, that it was his moment to step into something greater. I don't know if I can help, Jack said, his voice rough with uncertainty. The woman didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. You already have, Jack. The fact that you're standing here now, that you've listened to me, is proof enough. You've been chosen for a reason. It's not by chance that we crossed paths. The world is changing, and we need people like you to stand with us. Her words were filled with conviction, and Jack could see the sincerity in her eyes. He had never been one for grand causes or lofty ideals, but something in her words resonated with him. He had always felt like an outsider, like he was meant for something more, but he had never known what. Perhaps this was it. What do you need me to do? Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman smiled, a mixture of relief and determination in her expression. I need you to come with me. There's a tribe that needs your help. A group of people who are under threat, and they have no one to turn to. But together, we might be able to protect them. Jack's mind raced. A tribe? What could he possibly offer to a group of people, especially if they were under threat? He was just a cowboy, not a warrior or a leader. But as he looked at the woman, he saw something in her eyes that made him hesitate. She believed in him, and that belief was enough to make him wonder if he could believe in himself. All right, Jack said, his voice firmer now. I'll come with you. The woman nodded, her expression softening. Thank you, Jack. You won't regret this. She turned, and Jack followed her, his heart pounding in his chest. They traveled for days, moving through the rough terrain of the West, the landscape shifting from dry deserts to rocky hills and forests. Along the way, the woman told him more about the tribe, about the people who were in danger. They were a group of Native Americans, a tribe that had lived in these lands for generations. They had been forced to live on the fringes of society, their land stolen, their culture slowly eroded. But the threat they now faced was greater than anything they had encountered before. Jack's mind swirled with questions. Who was the enemy? What was this threat that could bring an entire tribe to its knees? He didn't have the answers, but he could see the urgency in the woman's eyes. She was driven, determined to do whatever it took to protect her people. As they neared the tribe's location, Jack's anxiety grew. He wasn't a fighter. He wasn't even sure if he was cut out for this kind of mission. But when they arrived at the camp, something inside him shifted. The people there were nothing like the hostile strangers he had imagined. They were a tight-knit community, living off the land and bound together by shared history and struggles. The elders welcomed him with open arms, and the children looked at him with curiosity and innocence. Jack felt an overwhelming sense of peace settle over him, but it was quickly replaced by a feeling of dread as he realized what was at stake. The threat was closing in. Jack had no idea how he could help, but as he stood among the tribe, he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about protecting the tribe. It was about protecting the future of this land, of their culture, and of everything they held dear. And somehow he was a part of it. As Jack stood among the tribe, he couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. His whole life had been spent in solitude, isolated from the world, yet now he was standing in the heart of something much larger than himself. The people around him were watching him closely, some with curiosity, others with guarded caution. They didn't know him, and he didn't know them, but there was something about the way they looked at him, something in their eyes, that told him they needed him. The woman, whose name was now revealed to be Mira, led him to a large fire pit in the center of the camp. The flames flickered brightly, casting dancing shadows on the faces of the gathered tribe. Elders sat on one side, and the younger warriors, dressed in ceremonial attire, gathered on the other. Jack's nerves were on edge, but he pushed them down. He had made his choice to help, and now he had to prove it. As Mira took her seat by the fire, one of the elders, a tall man with silver hair and a commanding presence, stood up. His eyes were sharp, and his voice was calm but firm. "You are not of our people," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Yet you stand here among us. Tell us, Cowboy, why should we trust you?" The question hung in the air, heavy with expectation. Jack felt the weight of the gaze of the entire tribe upon him. His first instinct was to back away, to run from the pressure. But something inside him told him not to. He had come this far, and he couldn't turn back now. "I'm not asking for your trust," Jack replied, his voice steady. "I'm here because I was asked to help. That's all. I don't have all the answers, and I don't know what's coming, but I'm willing to fight for you. For your people." Myra's eyes locked with his, and for a moment, Jack saw something in them. A mixture of admiration and something else, something deeper. The elder nodded slowly, his gaze softening. "Words are easy, Cowboy. It's actions that speak." With that, he sat back down, and the murmurs of the tribe slowly faded into silence. Mira turned to Jack, her expression serious. "The enemy is closing in," she said quietly. "We don't know exactly when they will strike, but we can feel it. The land itself tells us that war is coming." Jack nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation, but he still didn't know who they were up against. Who was this enemy that posed such a threat to the tribe? "Who are they?" he asked, his voice low. Mira looked around at the tribe, then back at Jack. "They are the settlers, the ones who want to take what isn't theirs. They come with their guns, their greed, and their lies. They want the land we have fought to protect for generations. They want us gone. Jack's stomach tightened. He had heard rumors of land disputes, of violence between settlers and native tribes, but hearing it firsthand, from someone he now considered an ally, made it all feel real. "How can I help?" he asked, his voice more urgent now. Mira gave him a small, thoughtful smile. "By being part of the fight. You are more than you think, Jack. Your skills, your knowledge of the land, all of it will help us in ways you can't imagine." As the night wore on, Jack listened to the stories of the tribe. They spoke of their ancestors, of the battles they had fought to protect their way of life, and of the strength that ran through their blood. They weren't just warriors. They were a people bound together by a deep sense of community and respect for the land. Jack began to understand why they had chosen to fight. It wasn't just about land. It was about their very existence, their culture, and their future. The next morning, Jack stood at the edge of the camp, looking out over the vast, empty plains that stretched before him. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm glow over the earth. He could feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders, but he also felt something else: purpose. He was no longer just a cowboy. He was part of something much bigger than himself. Mira approached him, her face serious, but there was a glimmer of something, hope, perhaps, in her eyes. "Today, we prepare," she said simply. "The enemy won't wait forever." Jack nodded. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing. He was ready to face it, alongside the tribe. Whatever came next, he wouldn't back down. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Jack had never imagined that he would be part of something this grand, something this critical. The tribe was organizing, making plans, preparing their defenses in a way that Jack had never seen before. They had knowledge of the land, of the wilderness, and they used that to their advantage. Mira had briefed him on what was expected. He wasn't just here to fight. He was here to protect, to help the tribe survive. The settlers who were coming were no strangers to violence, and the tribe needed every hand they could get. Jack, with his experience on the ranch, his knowledge of the terrain, and his quiet determination, had a role to play. They needed him to lead smaller groups, scout the area, and find the weak points where they could make their stand. On the third day of preparations, they heard the first signs of the enemy. The distant sound of horse hooves carried through the hills, an eerie reminder of what was coming. Jack stood at the edge of the camp, looking out over the vast plains. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the land. It felt like time was standing still, like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for the storm to hit. Mira approached him, her face set in a determined expression. "They're coming," she said, her voice steady but filled with an undeniable sense of urgency. "It's time." Jack nodded, trying to steady the nerves that had begun to twist in his gut. He wasn't afraid, not exactly, but the weight of what was about to happen was heavy. He had lived his whole life in the shadows, keeping to himself, avoiding the spotlight. Now, he was about to face something he couldn't ignore. Mira placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch firm. "We stand together," she said. "We fight together. You're part of this now, Jack. There's no turning back." Jack didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The words were unnecessary. He understood. The tribe had accepted him, and now it was his turn to stand by them, no matter what. That night, Jack couldn't sleep. The camp was quiet, but the tension in the air was palpable. He could hear the soft murmurs of the tribe as they prepared for the battle ahead. The warriors sharpened their weapons, the elders spoke in low voices, and the children were kept close to the fires. Jack lay on his bedroll, staring at the stars above. He had never been a man for grand speeches or ideals. He had always preferred the simplicity of his ranch, the quiet life of tending to cattle and working the land. But now, everything had changed. Now he was part of something bigger than himself. The next morning, the first wave of the enemy arrived. It wasn't the full force of settlers yet, but it was enough to send a shiver down Jack's spine. They came riding in on horseback, their movements coordinated, their eyes scanning the land with the certainty of men who had come to claim what they thought was theirs. Mira stood beside Jack, her eyes cold and calculating as she watched the enemy approach. "This is just the beginning," she said quietly. "They'll keep coming until we're all gone. But we won't let them take this land. Not without a fight." Jack's grip tightened on his rifle. He wasn't a soldier, but he had fought for his land before, in small skirmishes with thieves and troublemakers. This, however, was different. This was a battle for survival, for something that went beyond land and cattle. It was a battle for their way of life, for everything that the tribe held dear. The enemy riders came closer, their horses kicking up dust as they approached the tribe's camp. Jack could see their faces now, hard men, with eyes that gleamed with greed and arrogance. They thought they had the upper hand, that their numbers and weapons would be enough to crush the tribe. But they didn't know the land, not like Jack and the tribe did. As the enemy came into view, Mira turned to Jack. "Stay close," she said, her voice low but firm. "And remember, we fight for more than just ourselves. We fight for each other." Jack nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to stand by and watch the tribe be destroyed. The battle was about to begin, and Jack was ready to fight. He had no choice now. He was in it, body and soul. The battle began with the first shots fired from the enemy's side. Jack's heart raced as the chaos unfolded in front of him. He had never experienced anything like this before, not in all his years of ranching and living a quiet life. The air was thick with the sounds of gunfire, the thundering of hooves, and the cries of men and women alike. Mira, standing next to him, was calm, her eyes scanning the battlefield with sharp focus. She moved with the grace of someone who had seen war before, someone who had lived through the horrors of it and emerged stronger. "Stay close," she shouted to Jack as she raised her rifle, taking steady aim at one of the enemy riders. Jack nodded, gripping his rifle tighter, though his hands were trembling. He wasn't sure how much help he could be, but he was determined to fight. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for the tribe, for the future they hoped to preserve. As Jack took his first shot, he felt the weight of his actions. His aim wasn't perfect, but it was enough to send one of the enemy riders tumbling from his horse. The rider's horse galloped off, and the man lay motionless in the dirt. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He had just taken a life, but there was no time to dwell on it. The enemy was relentless, pushing forward with the intent to overwhelm the tribe. Jack's pulse quickened as he took another shot, this time hitting a rider in the leg, sending him crashing to the ground. The tribe fought back fiercely, using the land to their advantage. They knew the terrain, the rocks, the trees, and the hills like the back of their hands. They moved through it with ease, dodging and weaving as they took down their attackers. But the settlers had more numbers, and they were coming at them from all directions. Jack could see the smoke rising from the enemy's campfire, and he knew that reinforcements were on the way. The odds were beginning to feel overwhelming. Mira moved beside him, her voice steady as she gave him instructions. "We need to get to higher ground," she said, pointing to a nearby hill. "We'll have the advantage there. We can hold them off longer if we get there first." Jack nodded, understanding the urgency in her voice. He followed her, running through the chaos of the battle as they made their way up the hill. The enemy was closing in, but Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer just fighting to survive. He was fighting for something bigger than himself. As they reached the top of the hill, Jack took a deep breath, looking down at the battlefield below. The tribe was still holding their ground, but it was clear that they were beginning to lose the upper hand. Jack's mind raced. They needed reinforcements, but how could they get them in time? And then he remembered something. The neighboring tribes. The ones he had heard of but never met. Mira had mentioned them, said they would come if the tribe was in danger. "Mira," Jack said urgently, "what about the other tribes? Will they come?" Mira glanced at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. "They will," she said quietly, "but we have to hold on until they do." Jack nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure how much longer they could last, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to give up. Not now, not after everything they had fought for. As the battle raged on, Jack fought with everything he had. He kept his focus on the task at hand, taking shot after shot, trying to keep the enemy at bay. But as the hours passed, it became clear that they were losing ground. The enemy was too strong, too many. Just when Jack thought they couldn't hold on any longer, a sound broke through the chaos. The sound of hooves pounding the earth. At first, Jack thought it was just another wave of enemy reinforcements, but as the riders appeared over the horizon, he saw something different. It was a group of warriors, dressed in the traditional clothing of the neighboring tribes, riding fast toward the battle. Jack's heart skipped a beat. The reinforcements had arrived. With a renewed sense of hope, Jack and Mira fought even harder, pushing back the enemy with everything they had. The tide of the battle began to shift. The settlers, now facing not only the tribe but also the combined forces of the neighboring tribes, began to retreat. Jack's eyes widened in disbelief as he saw the enemy begin to fall back, their formation crumbling under the pressure of the unified tribes. The battle was won, but at a great cost. The tribe had lost several brave warriors, and Jack knew that the price of their victory would haunt him for a long time. As the sun set over the battlefield, Jack stood among the survivors, his heart heavy with the weight of what had just happened. They had won, but at what cost? Mira walked up to him, her face marked with exhaustion but also relief. "You did it," she said, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. "We did it," Jack corrected, his voice thick with emotion. The fight wasn't over. There would be more battles, more struggles ahead, but for now, they had won. And that was enough. As the dust settled from the battle, Jack stood at the edge of the camp, looking out over the land. The sound of hooves faded into the distance, and the smell of smoke hung thick in the air. The tribe had won. Thanks to the reinforcements, they had managed to push the settlers back, but the victory felt hollow. The cost of that victory was visible in the faces of those around him. Wounded warriors, grieving families, and a tribe forever changed by the battle they had fought. Jack's heart felt heavy with the weight of what had happened. He had been part of the fight, and though the enemy had retreated, the toll of it was undeniable. He had seen men and women who had fought alongside him fall in the dust, their lives taken by the violence that had erupted in their world. Mira approached him, her face grim but resolute. She, too, had fought hard in the battle, and the exhaustion on her face was evident. "We won," she said quietly, "but the cost was high." Jack nodded, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," he admitted, his voice rough. "I'm not a warrior, Mira. I never was." Mira placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch firm but comforting. "You've proven yourself, Jack. Not just today, but in everything you've done. You helped us when we needed you the most. That's what matters." Jack looked down at his hands, still stained with the dust and blood of the battle. He wasn't sure if he believed her, but there was a part of him that wanted to. There was a part of him that wanted to believe that this fight, this cause, was worth everything. But as he looked around at the destruction, at the faces of those who had lost loved ones, Jack couldn't shake the feeling of doubt that gnawed at him. "How long can we keep fighting?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How long before it all falls apart?" Myra's expression softened, and she stepped closer. "I don't know," she said. "But we have to keep fighting, Jack. If we don't, everything we've worked for, everything we've built, will be lost." Jack met her gaze, seeing the determination in her eyes, and for the first time, he felt a spark of hope. Maybe she was right. Maybe this fight wasn't just about land or survival. Maybe it was about something bigger, something worth fighting for. The tribe needed him. The land needed him. And for the first time, Jack felt like he was part of something larger than himself. That night, as the camp settled down and the fires burned low, Jack sat alone, watching the stars overhead. The battle was over for now, but he knew it wasn't the end. There would be more battles, more struggles ahead. He wasn't naive enough to think that everything would be peaceful from here on out. But as he sat there, the weight of the world on his shoulders, Jack knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone. The tribe had become his family, and they would stand together, no matter what came next. As the days passed, Jack found himself working alongside the tribe, helping to rebuild what had been lost. They repaired the damage to their homes, tended to the wounded, and honored those who had fallen. Jack did what he could, using his skills to help where he was needed, but he still felt like an outsider in many ways. He was part of the tribe now, but he was still trying to understand what it meant to truly belong. The tribe's leader, the elder who had questioned Jack during the battle, took him aside one day. "You've done well, Jack," he said, his voice rough but filled with respect. "But there is still much you need to learn. You are part of this tribe now, but you must learn our ways, our traditions, if you are to truly be one of us." Jack listened carefully, the weight of the elder's words sinking in. He had always thought of himself as an outsider, but now he realized that he needed to understand more than just the land he fought for. He needed to understand the people who had lived on this land long before he had ever arrived. Over the next few weeks, Jack spent his time learning from the tribe, sitting with the elders and listening to their stories. He learned of their history, their struggles, and their strength. He learned about their connection to the land, to the animals, and to each other. He realized that this wasn't just about survival. It was about honor, respect, and community. The more Jack learned, the more he understood. He wasn't just a cowboy anymore. He was part of this tribe, part of this world, and he had a role to play. It was a role he hadn't chosen, but one that he was beginning to accept. The battles would continue, but Jack knew he was ready to face whatever came next. He wasn't alone anymore. He had found his place, and he was willing to fight for it. For them. For the tribe. The days following their victory had been a mixture of quiet relief and heavy hearts. The tribe had lost good warriors, and the scars of the battle would take time to heal. Yet, there was a renewed sense of purpose in the air. The battle had proven something, not just to the settlers, but to the tribe itself. They were stronger than they had realized, capable of standing together against any threat. Jack had been by Myra's side every step of the way, learning not just about the land and the people, but about the unspoken bonds that tied the tribe together. It was clear now that his place here wasn't temporary. He was part of this family, this community, and it was his responsibility to protect it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of red and orange, Mira approached Jack. The camp was quieter than usual, the sounds of the tribe's evening activities soft in the background. Jack had spent the day helping to repair a shelter that had been damaged in the battle. He wiped the sweat from his brow, looking up to meet Myra's eyes. There was a seriousness in her gaze that made him pause. "We've received word," she said quietly, her voice filled with tension. "The settlers are planning another attack. It's not over yet, Jack." Jack felt a wave of dread wash over him, his body stiffening. He had hoped, for a brief moment, that they could live in peace, that the battle had been the end of it. But the look in Myra's eyes told him otherwise. "When?" he asked, his voice tight. Mira glanced around, ensuring no one else was listening. "In 3 days. They're gathering forces. We have to prepare." Jack's heart raced. 3 days. That didn't give them much time. But he knew what he had to do. "What's the plan?" he asked, ready to step up once again. Myra's expression softened for a moment before she spoke. "We've fortified the camp, but we need to be more strategic this time. We can't rely on just our numbers. We have to use the land, use everything we know about it to our advantage." Jack nodded. He had learned a great deal about the terrain since his arrival, and he knew how important it would be to fight smart, not just hard. "I can help with that," he said, his voice steady. "I know the best places to set traps, the paths they'll try to use to flank us. I'll make sure we're ready." Mira placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch firm and comforting. "I knew we could count on you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. But Jack saw the worry in her eyes. She had lived through enough conflict to know that victory wasn't guaranteed, no matter how prepared they were. As the days passed, Jack worked tirelessly with the tribe to fortify their position. They dug trenches, set up defensive barricades, and laid traps along the most likely paths the enemy would take. Jack had grown to respect the tribe's warriors, their resourcefulness, and their ability to adapt to the ever-changing landscape of the battle. But even with all their preparations, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The settlers weren't just coming with rifles and guns. They were coming with something else. A desire to destroy, to wipe out everything the tribe had fought for. On the second day of their preparations, Jack found himself standing at the edge of the camp, staring out at the horizon. The sky was clear, the air crisp, but the weight of what was coming settled heavily on his shoulders. He knew that this battle would be the defining one for the tribe. They couldn't afford to lose. Mira joined him, her steps silent on the earth. "You're thinking about the battle ahead, aren't you?" she asked, her voice soft. Jack nodded, not taking his eyes off the horizon. "I can feel it. They're coming. This time, they won't stop until we're gone." Mira stood next to him, looking out across the land. "We won't let them take this from us," she said with quiet determination. "We fight for our future, Jack. For our children, for our people, for the land that has been ours for generations." Jack turned to her, his heart swelling with a sense of duty. "I'm with you," he said, his voice resolute. "We'll fight together, and we'll win." The next morning, the camp was filled with a renewed sense of urgency. Everyone knew what was at stake, and the tribe's warriors moved with purpose. Jack helped lead the scouting efforts, ensuring that every trap was set, every route was covered. As the sun rose high in the sky, Jack could feel the tension building. The enemy would be here soon. But as the hours passed, the enemy did not appear. Instead, the day dragged on, and the uneasy stillness hung in the air. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the settlers were waiting for the right moment to strike. He wasn't wrong. As the sun began to dip low in the sky, the sound of hooves echoed through the land. It was the settlers, riding in full force, their numbers far greater than before. The time had come. Jack took a deep breath, steadying himself. The battle for the tribe's survival was about to begin, and he would stand by them, no matter what it took. The sound of hooves grew louder, echoing across the plains like the ominous drumbeat of an approaching storm. Jack stood at the front of the tribe's defenses, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on his shoulders. Mira was beside him, her expression steely, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the enemy riders appeared, their silhouettes sharp against the setting sun. The settlers had come, and this time, they were ready. Jack tightened his grip on his rifle, feeling the cool metal beneath his fingers. The air was thick with anticipation. The preparations were in place, the traps set, the warriors lined up behind him. But there was still an unease in the pit of his stomach. He had seen these kinds of battles before, but this one was different. This wasn't just a fight for land or survival. It was a fight for the future of a people, for a way of life that had endured for generations. "It's time," Mira said softly, her voice calm but filled with an unspoken determination. Jack nodded, his breath steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. "We hold the line. We fight for them." As the enemy drew closer, Jack could see their numbers, a sea of settlers on horseback, armed and ready for battle. But the tribe wasn't afraid. They had prepared for this moment. The first shots rang out, and the battle erupted in a flurry of gunfire, screams, and the sound of hooves pounding the earth. Jack moved quickly, directing small groups of warriors to key positions, keeping the settlers from advancing too far into the camp. The traps they had set worked to their advantage, slowing the enemy's progress and forcing them to adjust their strategy. But the settlers were relentless. They pressed on, firing from every direction, determined to break through. Jack felt a sharp sting in his shoulder as a bullet grazed him, but he didn't flinch. He kept moving, focusing on the task at hand. Mira was a blur of motion beside him, her rifle steady, her shots precise. She moved with the grace of a dancer, each step deliberate and calculated. Jack had never seen anyone fight like her. Together, they worked in perfect sync, each covering the other's blind spots, ensuring that the tribe's defenses held strong. As the battle raged on, the enemy's numbers began to dwindle. Jack could see the fear in their eyes now, the realization that they were outmatched. The tribe's warriors had fought fiercely, their knowledge of the land giving them the upper hand. The settlers, despite their weapons and numbers, couldn't keep up with the tribe's speed and tactics. But just when it seemed like the enemy might retreat, a louder, more dangerous sound pierced the air, the sound of reinforcements. The settlers had brought more men. The fight wasn't over. Jack's heart sank as he realized they were facing a second wave, one that might overwhelm them if they weren't careful. "Mira," Jack shouted, his voice hoarse from the intensity of the battle. "We need more time. We have to hold them off until the rest of the tribe arrives." Mira nodded, her face grim. "We will." With that, she turned back to the battle, rallying the warriors to hold their ground. Jack's mind raced as he assessed the situation. The second wave was coming fast, and they were running low on ammunition. The tide of the battle was turning, but they couldn't give up now. Jack moved toward the front lines, rallying the remaining warriors to prepare for the final stand. The tribe's survival depended on this. As the second wave of settlers charged forward, Jack took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was it. There was no turning back. The tribe had fought too hard, sacrificed too much to let this land slip away now. The ground beneath him shook as the settlers approached, but Jack stood tall, his rifle aimed at the oncoming wave. He wasn't just defending the tribe anymore. He was defending everything they stood for. With a single, decisive move, Jack fired, and the first of the settlers fell. That was all it took. The tribe, seeing the shift in momentum, surged forward with renewed strength. The settlers hesitated, unsure of what was happening, and in that moment of doubt, the tribe struck. The battle was fierce, but the tribe's warriors were unstoppable now. The settlers, once so sure of victory, turned and fled. The tribe had won. As the dust settled and the battlefield grew quiet, Jack lowered his rifle, his body aching from the fight. Mira stood beside him, her face showing the relief and exhaustion that mirrored his own. They had won, but at what cost? The tribe had lost many good warriors, and Jack knew that the scars of this battle would last a lifetime. But for now, they had won. They had held their ground. The future was uncertain, but Jack was no longer just a cowboy. He was part of something bigger, something worth fighting for. He turned to Mira, meeting her gaze. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with both pride and sorrow. Mira nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "We did, and we'll keep fighting. For as long as it takes."